Welcome to Live at 11 with me, Tracy from Sun Spiral. I hope you're doing okay. I've got my headphones in, so I'm hoping that you can't hear the drilling that's going on outside. One of the houses up the road is actually putting some railings in, and it started about 10 minutes ago, typically. But hopefully, it's only me that might potentially be distracted by that. If you're not watching live, you can watch this at any point on the catcher and Twitter. So feel free to comment at any point, even after this is no longer live, and I'll be able to back in touch. What I'm going to be doing today, I'm actually going to be doing a live demo of a people pleaser quiz. Our podcast episode on Monday was about likability, agreeableness, people pleasing, all that kind of stuff, why we do it. So I'll talk a little bit about why I got onto that. Then I'm going to do the live version of the quiz and go through. So if you are watching live, feel free to play along. I did put a link to the quiz in the information about the session today. It's not my own personal quiz. I didn't put it together. It's through a website called Psychologia, and they do a lot of these kinds of sort of personal development, personal behavior, those kinds of quizzes. I find it quite interesting. So we'll go through that together, but obviously you'll be able to click on the link after. So if you do want to learn little bit more about yourself and your behaviors in that regard, then I'll put a link in the later on. So how did we get onto this for the purpose of this week's topic? Well, actually, we were on holiday a week or so ago, and I read this book, which will probably come through back to front if you're watching this. But it's called The Creative Nudge by Mick Mahoney and Kevin Chesters. And I actually read it because I'm interested in doing a podcast episode on creativity. We talk a lot within Sun Spiral about creativity and about creative thinking, not just being the preserve of sort of artists and designers and those kinds of roles, but how important it is in any walk of life, really. And a chapter that particularly caught me was this one, which again might be back to front, but it says be unreasonable. For the purposes of what we're doing, it being back to front is probably actually quite a good thing, because we're trying to turn things on its head a little bit. But it really talks about how we are sort of programmed in our own way to be reasonable all the time and to be agreeable all the time. And obviously that has its benefits in terms of forging good relationships with people, but it asks the question of, do we model this behavior at the expense of our own individual development? And it certainly made me look at areas where I might have been prone to making the likable choice, making the safe choice, being a good girl at the expense of doing actually what I might have would have been a more creative step, and would have sort of helped me. It might have been a little bit uncomfortable at the time, but might ultimately have helped me to develop myself and my career in the direction I wanted to, more quickly and more sort of creatively. So I wanted to assess areas where I may have played things a little bit safe for the sake of sort of other people. So I think that talking about people pleasing is quite an interesting way of doing that. And when I was talking on the podcast on Monday, I talked a little bit about an interview I had for a job in HR a number of years ago now. And I did a psychometric test for that. And one of the things that the psychometric test brought up was your capacity or tendency towards people pleasing. And the person who was interviewing me actually said, if you have a look at this, when we were going through the results afterwards, you've scored 8 out of 10 for people pleasing. Would you say that you are a bit of a people pleaser? And because we developed quite a good rapport, I found myself saying, well, it is a job interview, so I am going to be answering the questions probably more based on what I think you want to hear. So within this environment, I probably am being a bit of a people pleaser. Is it my natural tendency? Possibly a little bit, but I can find that useful at times. So I kind of sort of played it from that self-aware approach, I think. But it did lead ultimately to me thinking, well, hang on, am I a bit of a people pleaser? And for the purposes of that psychometric test that I did, the people pleasing element wasn't just to assess that as a quality or not. It was to underpin how you may have answered all of the questions. So, in terms of how the direction that that conversation took, it actually brought up those questions around self-awareness and the value of those kind of tests within that environment generally. So people pleasing is something that I certainly am quite conscious of. And when I talk to clients, I talk to them in terms of what the choices that they're making, and are they making those because they really want to take that path, or are they looking at that to meet other people's expectations and to meet social expectations of them, based on other things that are part of their life. I'm doing a psychology course at the moment, just through Coursera. It's an online one, and one of the things that goes through is the Freudian sort of ego, id, and superego. Now, I know Freud isn't particularly fashionable anymore, but the idea of the superego almost is that social them, the they that we talk to, who they, that kind of sits in your head. So it's that voice, or like your conscience, but not quite just from a personal perspective. It's that sort of social conscience, that stops you behaving in certain ways that could be detrimental, which, socially is a good thing. But can some of those things make you so cautious that you behave at the expense of your own growth? So, those sort of things are quite interesting, and I'm quite interested in all of that stuff. So I found this quiz online that I'm now going to do live. And like I said, if you are watching, play along, do it yourself. With these kinds of quizzes, it's much like the 16 personalities and those kinds of psychometric analytical tests that I talked about a few weeks ago when we were talking about personal qualities and self awareness. Always kind of take them with a pinch of salt. These things are really sort of ingrained opinions of what could be, and they can change on day to day. I might do this quiz today and have a completely different answer to how I answer it tomorrow, because something's happened, or because I'm just feeling more confident or less confident. So there's all kinds of things that can impact on the results of these kinds of things. So always take them as a pinch of salt, do it as a bit of fun, but also see, are there areas for development? Can I look at this and say, well, actually maybe I am a little bit geared towards that. What can I do to try and mitigate that? Or if it's a positive quality, what can I do to try and enhance that? So I'm going to bring up the quiz now. I'm hoping that pops up on the screen. So, as I said, it's not my own personal quiz. It's by a company called Psychologia, who have a lot of links to the 16 types. So, it's all within that kind of personal behavior framework. But the quiz designed to ask you different questions to assess whether you are a quick people pleaser, whether you're, too desperate to gain the approval of others. So when I started, I was talking about that kind of social need to protect and enhance relationships. This is to assess, do you take that a little bit too far? Are you chronically trying to please other people at the expense of yourself? As we go through, there are a lot of adverts and things that pop up. There might be links to, like, affiliated links, so I'm just going to ignore all of those. There's quite a lot of questions, but I'll rattle through them quite quickly. And as I said, I'll also put a link to the test so that you can have a go yourself later on if you want to. So the starting point is, whenever I sense that someone disagrees with my point of view, I tend to soften my opinion, and it ranges from always to never. So I'm going to say occasionally, don't fall too much in the middle ground or long. I am an image conscious person. Moderately, and I can feel I'm already hitting the middle ground. Is that to be agreeable? I don't know. I find it hard to set boundaries with some people. Actually, I'm going to say rarely, because I am quite good at setting boundaries. I intentionally compliment people to appear more likable. I'm going to say often, because I think I can be a little bit that way inclined. I try and be genuine with those kinds of compliments. But again, it's like, why am I behaving in that way? Is it because I genuinely want to say, oh, you look nice today. I really like your new skirt or your new pen or your new car? Is it that I actually really like it, or am I just trying to enhance those relationships? Okay. Right. Next question. I prioritize everyone else's needs no matter how it affects me. Actually, I don't think I do. So I'm going to say rarely. I work overtime to please my sore colleagues. Never. Being in a relationship is important to me. I feel incomplete without a relationship. Yeah, I'm going to say that's important. Conflict makes me anxious. I avoid confrontation. Occasionally, I'm treated like a doormat. I'm going to say rarely because I don't really think I am. I compare myself to others. Occasionally, I put more importance on other people's feelings than my own. Occasionally, whenever my friends complain about something, I tend to express my agreement with their point of view, even if I secretly think they're wrong. Oh, that's a tough one because it depends if they're upset or something like that. So again, I'm going to say occasionally. I feel like I'm weaseling a little bit in the middle ground, but we'll see how we get on. I forgive those who hurt me out of fear of losing relationships, even when it still hurts. Rarely. I only attempt to do things I know I can succeed at. Oh, that's a different kettle of fish, isn't it? Because that links into the whole perfectionism and fear of failure and that kind of thing. So I'm actually going to say often because that is my tendency. It's a tendency I'm trying to work away from. But if I'm trying to fill the quiz in based on my current behavior rather than my wish fulfillment, then I think I'm going to have to say that, yeah, I am prone to doing that. I give more than I take. I'm going to say rarely. I'm often stuck doing things I don't want to simply because I can't say no. Rarely. Or is for not reciprocating? Yeah, occasionally. I imitate other people's role and clothing styles. Rarely. If I was filling it in as a teenager, it would be a very different story. But these days, no. I don't complain about bad service or product. I don't complain. That's a bit of a double negative, isn't it? I often don't complain. Oh, that's all right. I apologize when I don't have to. Yeah, often. I apologized to someone in Costa the other day because I was putting my coat on while they were waiting for my table. How daft is that? So again, I do it, but it's something that I've got to try and work away from. So let's see what my results are. So I scored a 48, and if I go down to the scores, I can see 70 to 100 is obviously high. Less than 20, very low. 20 to 39, fairly low. So mine was, what was I say? 48. So 40 to 69. While you are not a chronic people pleaser, you do sacrifice a lot. You may be very assertive with some people in your life while being treated like a doormat by some others. It is very likely that you find it difficult to assert yourself with some of the most important people in your life, your spouse, your children, or some family members. You are draining out of energy and feeling very resentful. These two downloads might help setting boundaries and learning to say no. Okay, so they've got a couple of resources there that might be able to help me. So it's interesting to see the different kinds of advice given to different people. So if people have got this sort of less than 20%, it much, you're an independent thinker, you take criticism well, you achieve, you're not really concerned about being diplomatic. Doesn't really say whether you ought to try and be a bit more sensitive and considerate, but again, it's just identifying it, isn't it, for you to then take away and see what you can do with that information. um 20 to 39, which is probably more ideal middle ground. You're a warm, considerate person, you believe that you take care of others, meeting your own needs first. You're a good friend. You're able to attend to others. So probably the ideal ground to try and get to, not falling so insensitive that you turn into, remember Nicholson's character in that film, As Good as It Gets. It's quite an old film now, but it's just that kind of almost sociopathic people unpleasing. So it's finding that ground where you're still considerate, you still take other people's feelings into account, but you're able to prioritize and assert your own needs. And then obviously if you're 70 to 100, excessively dependent on other people's opinions of you, and that's when it becomes particularly dangerous, I think, doesn't it? So that's when you're maybe looking at assertiveness programs, looking at therapy and those kinds of talking therapies, coaching, those kinds of things, to see what your barriers and issues are in order to try and address them. So that's a little quiz. That's me doing the little quiz and me as a people pleaser. But I'd be really interested if you had a look at it yourself and let me know in the comments, even later on, how you got on with it, and whether you're coming out as a people pleaser or whether your independent thinking is something that you're happy with. I'm going to end with a quote, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier on about sort of super ego and the they out there that we kind of often feel beholden to without really understanding why. And another book that we're using a lot at the moment, because it talks very much about creative thinking. Again, it's going to come out back to front probably on this live stream, but it's even more appropriate. Whatever you think the opposite, by Paul Arden. And this is very much about taking your opinions, your views, and just turning them on their head, and really challenging yourself and challenging sensible ideas and sensible ways of doing things. And we've always done it this way. Well, why? Really shaking it up and challenging it. So this is a great book. But one of the things that it brings up is a quote by Oscar Wilde that I'm going to read you. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives are mimicry. Their passions are quotation. And I think that's really interesting. There's a picture of some sheep here to kind of really drive that point home. So give some thought to that, particularly that first line. Most people are other people. When the voice in your head that's telling you what to do, what progress is for you, whose voice is that actually? Give that some thought. Is other passions that you've worked towards, really scrutinize that they are actually your passions and that you are doing the things that you want to do, or are you being a bit agreeable? So I'm going to leave it there for now. Thanks for joining me. If not live, then thanks for having a look later on the replays. As I said, I'm on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So feel free to connect, follow, subscribe, or all of that good stuff. That would be great. Next week's session of the podcast on Monday is about perseverance and the importance of just tenacity and keeping going, which I think is going to be great. It was based on my experience at the weekend of doing a 5 kilometer run. So I'll talk a bit more about that in the podcast, and then we'll do something during the live stream that sort of backs that up and goes into a little bit of more detail. So thanks for joining, and I'll see you next week. Bye.